Today is Tuesday, 15th August 2023. Welcome to a special program on Pan-African Radio, The Voice of Africa. The program is going to discuss coups, the Constitution or constitutionalism, and the future of Pan-Africanism. Violent conflicts and civil strife in West Africa have been the elephant in the room of late. An effort by the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, is just in progress, trying to bring peace into Niger. On this program, we feature academician and probably a man, one of the two persons in Zambia credited to have been instigators, for want of a better term, of a return to multipartyism, together with the one comrade Meritbased. We are hosting none other than Akashambatwa Mbikusita-Lewanika. Prince Aka, welcome to the program.
Thank you very, very much. This is a very, very important topic, very timely, particularly as regard the recent developments in West Africa.
Why do you think there is so much turmoil in the community of West African states, a region that has a lot of wealth? What are the causes, or what are the remedies to the conflict in ECOWAS?
You know, military coups are on the African continent are as old as the African Union from its Organization of African Union days. As you know, one of the early military coups, not counting the Egyptian 1952 coup which brought in Nasser, was the coup in Togo when President Olympia was assassinated in 1963, and that was the same year that the Organization of African Unity met. So basically, the new development, I see it as being a door opener or a door reopener, because we've had so many opportunities to correct the African situation. The challenge of Africa is meaningful decolonization. What passed for independence did not achieve decolonization.
Why did what passed for independence not achieve decolonization?
Because if you are clear what colonization was the capture and control of African land and natural resources, control of African peoples, and command over the economy and politics and social development of Africa. Now, in what passed for independence was very superficial.
Was cosmetic.
We changed flags. From white governors, we had black presidents. From countries named as Nyasaland, you got Malawi. Countries named as Northern Rhodesia, you got Zambia. And from having a white man in Government House on Independence Avenue, you got a black man in State House on the same Independence Avenue. So that those are our experience after independence, is that the decolonization did not take place because the control over our economy has continued, the control over our politics has continued, the colonial mentality has continued. And what is encouraging about the development in West Africa in the recent months in Burkina Faso, in Guinea, and in Mali, and lately in Niger, is that you have young people, relatively young people, who are not even there when independence was declared, beginning to question
The basis upon which the liberty.
yes, the illusion that we got independence, the illusion that we decolonized,
because they
the
don't see the
illusion
benefits.
that the colonialists left, so that they are raising those questions about the place of foreign military institutions on African soil. The French, the Americans, and others.
We've also seen the Russian flag being prominent in the Niger conflict.
I think that is just a reaction because, you know, the real culprits are Westerners. The real culprits are America. The real culprits are
They could
Western
be the ones
Europe,
that are even
so that
this.
in order to kind of show them the finger,
Yes,
you show a Russian flag, which is a sign of their rejection, that we are rejecting this white domination. Now, when you look at the countries that have of late taken this path, it is historically very significant because in 1958, when Charles de Gaulle declared that France was ready to decolonize and offered African territories what he called independence, and of all the territories under French colonialism, only Guinea voted against continuing under the new arrangement which de Gaulle was
what you refer to as a cosmetic arrangement.
Yes, which was basically a decolonization, which was fake, an independence without decolonization. In fact, in the French territories, they offered them to sign a document actually calling an agreement for the continuation of colonialism. So it was quite blunt. And the currency of French territories were being managed by the Central Bank of France. The political policies of the French countries were being marshaled from Paris, and so on and so forth. Now it's so encouraging to see young people getting up to say, no, let us revisit this independence. We are not independent. We can't be independent while having other people's armies on our land. We can't be independent having our central banks rendered irrelevant because we are either hooked to the dollar or hooked to the French francs, and our money is related to other people, under the control of other people.
So the economy, people want it to be in their own hands. They want to determine the future.
What you have is that in terms of economic development, genuine economic development, which does not come with land dispossession, which comes with freedom, justice, and equality, and which comes with real development, has not taken place.
Why has it not taken place?
Because the colonialization has continued. The colonization of Africa has continued, and African leaders have gone along with it in the hope that moving from colonialism to neo-colonialism was at least a progressive step, but it was, even at its best, it was supposed to be a step one towards fuller decolonization. As you remember, in Zambia in 1968-69, when many of the mines and industries were nationalized, the declaration was that now that we have nationalized, Zambia is now ours. That in addition to the political independence we gained or were granted in 1964, now the economic independence was coming.
Without pointing,
nothing of the sort happened, because even where we nationalized the mines, we granted the management contracts to the same Anglo-Americans who owned them. Even where we nationalized the mine, we continued the same colonial capitalist system of economics. We continued with the same structure of the economy, whereby development was limited to the line of rail. I'm talking now in case of Zambia. And the bulk of the territories and the people, the population of outside the line of rail, instead of continuing in backwardness, actually were being progressively undermined. So we continued with an economy which was dependent, which was underdeveloping the majority of our people and our territories, and which was based on an unequal exchange, whereby from our own resources, outsiders were benefiting more than us. In fact, outsiders were benefiting while we were not benefiting in a sustainable manner. So even the illusions of benefits, after a while you discover they are not real. That there was an illusion that you are benefiting from roads from Mungu to Lusaka, and now they are full of potholes. So it was not sustainable.
The economy is failing to maintain the roads.
And the dependence basically continues. Now, the other aspect of it, which is encouraging about the development, is the solidarity. There have been so many military coups in Africa. But I think lately, this is the first time that you have had leaders who have come out of a coup in one country show solidarity to other leaders who have come up in coups. We have had coups in Nigeria. We've never heard the Obasanjos when they took over. Supporting other coups in other countries. So this is a very interesting, particularly because of when we look at which countries are beginning this process, that these countries include Mali, they include Guinea. Then we are reminded that after the Guineans under the leadership of Sekou Touré rejected the French proposal of neo-colonialism, and were punished by the French for it, Ghana, under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah, reached out. In fact, they granted Guinea, I think it was £10 million in those days, and moved towards unifying Guinea with Ghana. And shortly after that, Mali, under the leadership of Modibo Keita, also joined. So a union of three countries, Ghana, Guinea, and Mali, was formed as a nucleus of the Union of Africa, in the hope that other Africans will join in.
This is what gives you optimism that
now I think that there is an opportunity that Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, Niger could begin. That in fact they should even be thinking of forming a union among themselves of genuinely progressive, genuine liberation movements in Africa.
They should reject
military presence of Americans and the French and anybody else, who reject the unequal economic relationship with the West, and who truly are committed to genuine development, which comes without land dispossession, which comes without being dominated externally, which comes without dependency, and which comes without an underdevelopment element in it. So that if they form such a union, then the condition for other countries joining is that they must be on the same page. That the only countries that should join them are those that truly don't want military presence, those that don't want neo-colonialism, and those that want an African united on the path towards progressing the decolonization struggle beyond what independence gave.
So with this encouraging development in the Sahel region, you think that consolidating constitutionalism is the way to go?
You see, what is being talked about as constitutionalism by our oppressors, the American and exploiters, the Americans and the French and their puppets, such as the majority of ECOWAS, is ridiculous. There was no constitutionalism in these countries. There's no constitutionalism in Nigeria. There's no constitutionalism in Cote d'Ivoire. Cote d'Ivoire, the present government in Cote d'Ivoire was put in place by French people, by French army, military. It was not even civil. The leader of Chad is a coup plotter. The present president of Ghana, of Nigeria, was a vice president of a military coup leader, Buhari. So they have no moral grounds, actually, to talk against military coup. But what now is being brought to the fore is that we have to reconsider that perhaps just paper constitutions, paper civilian governments, paper independence is not enough. That perhaps we shouldn't just assume that when we succeeded in removing the one-party state or succeeded in removing military governments, that we had made a sustainable step forward towards decolonization. Because we have reintroduced multipartyism in Kenya, in Malawi, in Zambia, and in many other places in Africa.
In Zimbabwe.
But Zimbabwe never officially went into a one-party state. But you see, the governments that replaced the one-party state, that benefited from the reintroduction of multi-party, have not fundamentally killed the one-party mentality or the one-party system.
Is it because of you and your peers never looked at the constitution?
So that the returning Zambia, for example, to multipartyism has come with such a minimal step forward that the essence of the one-party state still remains. The government of Zambia is still dominated by one party. The ruling party still captures the state, and the circus of going to elections, changing governments in Zambia, we have changed. I think we have had 6 or 7 presidents. We have had 3 or 4 parties.
But we are not improving.
But the system remains the same.
It's
the same with the countries that have removed military government, replaced them with civilian government, where presidents change constitution at a drop of the hat, perpetuate themselves in office, dance to the tunes from Paris and Washington. And that's not enough. So that one, of course, hopes that the future of Africa is not a future of military government, but we should also be aware that simply not having a military government does not mean that we have arrived.
Nowadays, this means that we cannot control our economy because the economy is in the hands, the markets are in the West. How can Africans trade amongst themselves so that they produce and trade among themselves so that then we will be weaned from the Western market? From
the 1970s, we sang the slogan that part of the problem of Africa is that we produce what we don't consume and consume what we don't produce. That of what we produce, when we sell it, what we earn is less than we need to import what we consume. So that it is very, very important that our economies should move from being raw material suppliers, being production units for outsiders, for their benefits, with us not being shareholders. This is why I keep saying that we must understand that genuine development does not come with land dispossession, which means that If you nationalize the mines or privatize the mines under the same system, you've done nothing. So when we nationalized, we handed over the management of the mines to Anglo-American. When we privatized, we handed over the mines to Anglo-American. So we didn't change anything. Neither nationalization nor privatization fundamentally changed the system. It did not even change who wins and who loses. It does not change our position from losers and the position of foreigners from being the winners out of our own land and natural resources. So those are the questions that one hopes are being raised together with the question of rejecting military presence in Africa, rejecting economic management from outsiders, rejecting political dictation from outsiders.
Now the future looks rather bleak. Do you have a sense of
No, the future to me
regret?
doesn't look bleak. It's not doesn't the present is very bleak.
The status quo is very bleak.
Very bleak. Our experience since independence is very bleak, and therefore any change from there is an opportunity to make sure that the change that comes brings in the light. They say that the dawn comes after the darkest hour. So one hopes that these problems that are popping up are directing us to re-examine more critically what the problem really is, and to recommit ourselves more seriously of what the solution is. The problem is the colonization in every aspect. The solution is genuine and thorough, absolute decolonization.
How can we achieve that genuine decolonization?
First of all, of course, you begin by rejecting colonialism thoroughly. What passed for independence did not amount to genuine rejection of colonization.
Because our leaders accepted the trappings of
we committed ourselves to colonial boundaries. We committed ourselves to a colonial capitalist system. We committed ourselves to Eurocentric governance system. We committed ourselves to carrying the white man's burden against traditional Africa, against indigenous Africa, our indigenous religions, our indigenous agricultural system. Now we are being told that we should have a green agriculture. Mm-hmm. Before colonialism, Africa had no agriculture except a green agriculture. It's colonialism that moved us from a green agriculture to a chemical-based agriculture, from a green agriculture to an agriculture which we have now, even those who taught it to us, are recognizing that it's damaging the climate, the environment, and everything else. So that this also is a sign that perhaps we should have more faith in our Africanness, our heritage, and we should reassert it, restore it, and make it in the driving seat. Japan, China are developing and modernizing. The Chinese are developing and modernizing without de-Chinizing themselves. The Japanese are modernizing, democratizing without de-Japanizing themselves. So Africa must modernize, democratize without de-Africanizing ourselves.
And that is by going back to our foundation, where we grew our own food, we grew exactly what we need, not where we are growing crops that are important.
Because there is no free person who doesn't feed himself. The number one requirement of freedom is to be able to feed yourself. So that whatever, and also to be self-determined, we have to determine what we want, how we want to develop. Out of what we want, we must maximize what we can do for ourselves.
We should develop at our own pace.
We should be open to outside assistance, outside cooperation, outside exchange, but this should be complementing our own plans. We shouldn't require that the IMF has to approve our economic plan for us to develop. We have to have our own plan, be committed to it, and then headhunt factors and people and things that complement what must always be our plan.
So we cannot run away from the fact that we have an obligation to dance to the tune. Is it that we are, at all costs, we have to dance to the tune of the IMF?
We don't have to, and we have danced for 60 years. It doesn't help. Many countries like Zambia, like Ghana, they've gone to the IMF in and out for countless times. Sometimes we think we are negotiating with the IMF. There are no negotiations with the IMF. The IMF conditions are the same. The way they were in 1981, in 1991, in 1996, they are the same as today. So the obligation is for us to go along with them or to be punished. Secondly, the concerns of the IMF, the West, is with their interest, not necessarily our interest.
When you talk about their interest and our interest, there is an argument that it's time for reparations to be paid. Because even when you talk about we have an obligation to pay the debt,
now that is a big topic which requires the question of reparation. Because this now raises other issues of slavery, of colonialism, of the cumulative exploitation of African and African people, which amounts to the theft of African resources. That is a real big topic, and that is part and parcel of what decolonization really means, because there must be a restoration, there must be retribution for the injuries that have been caused. But when we are talking about the IMF, is that their central concern and interest has to do with maintaining a system whereby a few people in the world are donors and others are recipients of donations. A few people in the world are seen to be lenders, and the majority of us are debtors, and that this system of borrowing and then being indebted and then paying back and getting back again to borrowing in a cycle, endless cycle, is what their interest is.
So how do we win ourselves from it? From the begging ball?
First and foremost, we must understand that even if there is a debt problem, addressing the debt problem cannot be the totality of addressing the challenge of developing the country. So that we should pay more attention to how to get the majority of our people into economic production for self-reliance, for feeding ourselves, not just exclusively addressing the debt problem so that those we owe money can be repaid.
But that must be priority.
And then hook us again
paying debt
to the same system of debt. As you know, we from 1973, 74, 75, for 25 years, Zambia was in economic regression. And the answer we were getting from Washington and the Washington consensus was that we borrow to solve our problem, on the assumption that the problems we were facing was one of a bridging finance, that it was a temporal situation that the oil prices have risen, that it was a temporal situation that the copper prices have fallen, and therefore if we get a loan to bridge that gap, then we'll normalize. Now, that was a superficial identification of the problem. In other words, there is a fundamental problem of the economic system itself that makes our production vulnerable to outside forces, which is related to the nature of the economy that we have accepted. An economy that's externally dependent, an economy that is disarticulated in terms of minimal linkages outside the production area. In the case of Zambia, outside the mines and the line of rail, we are not linked to the rural areas, and instead the labor that the limited labor we get from the rural areas for the mines, for the line of rail, is actually labor we are depriving the agrarian, the green agriculture in the rural areas from having, and therefore becomes an underdeveloping factor. So that system itself is the one that makes us that occasionally you may think that you have developed because the oil prices has gone down, but it has not gone down on your account. There's nothing you have done to reduce it. Sometimes you celebrate that the dollar has gone down, but there's nothing you have done to force it down. There's nothing you are doing to make sure it doesn't rise
just
again.
basic economics. You have not exported anything.
So there's nothing. In other words, it's just external market forces, which is another thing we need to examine. In fact, there is no such things as free market forces. There is external manipulation of the prices of commodities. There is external manipulation of the dollar prices, and as long as we are hooked to it, we are tying ourselves to perpetual dependency and unsustainable development.
So how can we, we're looking back at where our leaders should have, on gaining independence, where they should have maintained the economy in indigenous hands. How do you think they should have done it better?
In fact, the promise of independence was that, as Nkrumah said, seek ye first the political kingdom and all things will be added unto you. So the assumption was that it is clear that political independence alone is not enough, that we have to move to economic independence. And that is the challenge which Africa has not risen to.
So why is Africa not rising to that challenge? The economic challenge? Is it because of the fact that the global economy is in the hands of the West?
There are many factors. Some are colonial mentality, some are personal ambitions, that as long as you are president, then you have succeeded, never mind if your country, as long as, then if you are president, then your country is independence. For you personally, it's enough. Whereas we have to look at the total population, particularly looking at the most vulnerable, the most victims of this system in the rural areas, in the villages. Right now, many of our villages, the conditions are worse than before independence.
Why is it that despite the conditions being worse than before independence, a voter's card reaches the remotest part, even the remotest island in the country? But
clearly what is that there are certain people who are benefiting from this circus of elections, which bring no change into the nation as a whole, but brings a lot of change to certain individuals. From cycling, you become an MP and you have a 4x4 car. From whatever station of life you are, you become president. So to you, it's success. But to those who voted for you, and then we ourselves as people as a whole, we are also challenged. Because you may recall that one of the slogans of the independence and the liberation movement in Southern Africa, headed by Congress movement, was one man, one vote. And the hope was that once an African has the vote, then they will use it to have a government leadership of their choice, to have government policies of their choice, and to have a government which is theirs, and to have a government that works for them.
That's the phrase, government of the people, by the people, for the people.
Yeah. Now, what we have experienced is that the vote has been undermined. Some people sell their votes to the highest bidder. Some people buy votes for leadership. And therefore, the voter is not a free-minded person looking after their interests. They are voting for the interest of those who have bribed them. Thieves are the greatest beneficiaries to elections because they've stolen enough money to buy votes. They've stolen enough money to look successful. And therefore, what it means is that we have to re-examine that having a vote, having elections may be necessary, but it's certainly not enough. And in fact, it can only be good if it is genuinely free of corruption and free of intimidation and really being utilized effectively by the voter to ensure that they have the leadership which is in their interest and the interest of the rest of their fellow citizens.
And the only recourse to that for a citizen guarantee is a civil service that is merit-based. Do you think a merit-based civil service can be achieved?
It must be achieved, but it has not been achieved. First and foremost, clearly there's nobody who doesn't understand that in terms of the public service, we need a merit-based, professional, and non-partisan public service. We need a government of Zambia, which is a government of all Zambians. We need a government of Malawi, which is a government of all Malawans. We don't need a government which belongs to a particular party, which is captured by a particular party. And we don't want a public service that is partisan, that serves party members rather than the general public, whose selection of officers is not based on merit and equal opportunities. It's based on appointment, guided by partisanship, guided by short-term selfish individual interests. That is the major challenge that we have. And talking about coups, those who say that we don't want military government, we want a return to constitutionalism, must go further than that. They must demand that we need defense forces that are merit-based, that are professional, and that are non-partisan, that are genuinely nationalist above party politics. Now, unfortunately, the same people who are doing the appointment in the rest of the public service are also doing the appointments in the military service. So that as we fail to build a merit-based, professional, non-partisan civil service, we are also failing to build a merit-based, professional, non-partisan defense forces, police forces, who can serve the country as a whole while turning a blind eye to the party, while turning blind eyes to their appointing persons. So that is another challenge. So when we say that we are against the coup in Niger, they should return to constitutionalism. If the constitutionalism we are returning to is based on a government whose public service is not merit-based, whose public service is not professional, whose public service is partisan, then we are fooling people and they will rebel. And what we are getting now is the people actually understanding that no, this constitutionalism is fake. These governments that we have in Africa are not governments for all the people. They are government to some people. And therefore, you don't have to be loyal to such a government.
In the Niger case, the coup came barely a year and a half after what was seemingly a genuine election.
First of all, it is not even the first coup in Niger. And in any case, the Niger to which the civilian government which has been removed was governing, was a Niger with the American military in place. It is a Niger with French military in place. It's a Niger whose currency is directed in Paris. It's a Niger that's not independent. It's a Niger that's not African. It's a Niger that perpetuates colonialism. So for to say that remove the soldiers, let's return to such a Niger is ridiculous.
It's ludicrous.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And so now we're talking about the future of Pan-Africanism, a true Pan-African situation.
I think that
Where do we go?
The future of Pan-Africanism, clearly, we were colonized because of certain weaknesses. We were colonized because we were not united. Sometimes we say that the European colonizers divided Africa, but in fact, at no time was the whole of Africa united. And that's why it was easy to overrun it and to occupy it and to conquer it. And therefore, in trying to reverse the colonization process, we must also strengthen ourselves so that we are in a better state to avoid being conquered, being captured. Now, this is where Pan-Africanism comes, that if we could unite Africa, it will mean an Africa that can defend itself against being colonized or against the return of colonialism and against neo-colonialism. But just being united without being committed to decolonization is also not the answer. And this is why I was saying that perhaps the new development should be a new chance to start the African Union, to start the unification of African countries.
That is firm. That was
country by country, but very selective. Not to start an African Union in which every African country can be a member, whether it's a puppet of the French, whether it's a puppet of Americans. They all are members of the African Union. And therefore, even when they declare neutrality, they don't mean it because others are in the pockets of the enemies. And therefore, our weakness is within. So that we may have to revisit what Nkrumah, Sekuture, and Modibo Keita tried to say, okay, let us, at least the three of us, the three countries that are on the same page, start
building something.
Unfortunately, those builders of those ended up in a grouping of Africans called the Casablanca Group, while the other Africans were in the Monrovia Group. The Organization of African Union was a compromise between these two groups in the hope that we should water down our commitment to Pan-Africanism, our commitment to decolonization for the sake of maximizing the unity of Africa. Now, that experiment has taken place since 1963, which is 60 years ago. It has not worked. So that maybe this is a time to review another approach, to start another approach, to start an African Union whose members are on the same page, whose members are absolutely against colonialism in any form or decolonization into its maximum, whose members are for the independence and self-reliance of Africa absolutely, whose members are prepared to sacrifice for an African unity, African solidarity, which is based on the principles of commitment to decolonization.
But why is it that Africans are not united?
Well, Well, united, you have to work on unity. As you can see that we were conquered one by one. Having been conquered one by one, we were then amalgamated at the choice of outsiders. In other words, it is outsider who decided that Lubemba and Barosiland should be under one territory. It was not Lubemba people or Barosi people who said that's what we wanted. So that these colonial boundaries themselves are creation of colonialism. They are very convenient for colonialism. They make it very difficult to move forward in a united
one would have opted
because they are not organic formations. They are not formations that are based on genuine self-determination by the people themselves. The people were never given a chance to decide whether this is something they are committed to. Instead, we got flag independence and decided to accept colonial boundaries, and we have spent the last 60, 70 years killing Africans over colonial boundaries. So we are killing Africans in the Congo for the sake of
maintaining
the conglomeration
colonial,
of King Leopold, the murderer of Africa. And we think that that is progressive. And so we have spent 60, 70 years trying to develop from a base of non-organic, non-indigenous, self-determined systems determined to unite.
So the boundaries that were imposed on us are limiting us.
Well, they mean that, in other words, instead of moving forward the day after independence, we first have to consolidate the boundaries. We have to consolidate our unity. We have to get along with ourselves.
So can trade
to make matters worse is that even the semblance of solidarity that existed in the run-up to independence began to be destroyed almost the minute we got independence. In other words, people were prepared to be united against the British. Once we became independent, then to fight against the British, we needed each other. To build our nation, new independent nation, we think that we only need our tribesmen. We only need those who still with us. In other words, we don't need everybody. So the backbending attitude we had to make sure that there is solidarity in the fight against colonialism was not reproduced. And it's not only for independence. When we fought against the one-party state, we were very united.
When you won in the multi-party...
Then after you get multi-party system, then those you needed to be together with to fight the one-party state, you think you no longer need them.
So it's all an effort in vain.
So that is one of the areas which weakens our resolve to decolonize, because we are not as committed to African unity after independence as we were before independence.
So how can we use institutions like or associations
I'm optimistic that the young people are now picking up arms and rejecting fake decolonization. Hold the hope.
But how can we use institutions like SADC, COMESA to make these artificial boundaries?
I think we have to redecompose. We have to renegotiate. Because the SADC, the African Union, are based on colonial boundaries. And we have spent 7 years fighting, killing Africans.
So the pitfalls of SADC.
So that now you have some Congolese citizens who other Congolese think are Rwandese, and they are prepared to kill them for that.
So
there are some Nigerian citizens who who think that the Nigeria they want was one dominated by the North or dominated by Muslims. So they will fight to say Nigerian unity is not negotiable. But the building of one Nigeria, they are not prepared. Equal opportunities, equal services to everybody else. They want a president from their area. They want a president who steals with them, a fellow thief, maybe a business associate, to be president.
They don't want a president to serve all the interests of citizens.
No, because if you serve the interests of the citizen, it means, you are not going to get an unequal share. Because the other challenge we have is the challenge against building nations based on group domination, where some people dominate, others are dominated, others are discriminated against.
So
So one hopes that a new crop of African leaders will come who are genuine nationalists, inclusive nationalists, not selective nationalists.
In that optimism, or hoping that there's that genuineness coming, do you think it's achievable to have a civil service that is merit-based, that we have a people-centered constitutional environment?
Because a government that is committed to serving everybody else is a government that needs and that will encourage and that will promote a merit-based, professional, non-partisan civil service. When a government is undermining the merit-based civil service, when the government is undermining the professionalism of the civil service, when a government is undermining the non-partisanship of the civil service, then you know it's not committed to serving the nation as a whole.
So there is optimism at the end of the day.
My optimism is that all wrong solutions will not work. So ultimately, we will try all the solutions, fake solutions, and there will only be one genuine solution forward.
And that is...
And when I hear young people at 35 taking over countries and speaking that language, I'm optimistic that the future is bright.
On that score, Comrade Akashambatwa Mbikusita-Lewanika, that positive outlook of Africa, that we are headed to light from darkness. It was a pleasure hosting you on this special program.
Thank you very, very much. The most revolutionary thing is to be positive, because not to be positive means there's no need for a revolution.
On that positive trajectory, this has been Derrick Sinjela. I prefer calling myself prisoner of conscience, and the channel we are listening to is none other than Pan-African Radio, the voice of Africa, 96.1 FM.
Asante sana.
Asante sana.
Mungu akubariki.